The fastest way to discover who someone really is to give them a little authority and let them think nobody important is watching. Officer Ryan Whitaker smiled as he nudged the thick evaluation folder across the polished floor with the tip of his shoe. The folder slid several feet before stopping near a black woman standing quietly at the far end of the hallway. Conversations died instantly. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, and for a moment, even the usual noise of police headquarters seemed to fade into the background. Ryan folded his arms across his uniform and leaned against the security desk. A few officers nearby exchanged uneasy glances, but nobody said a word. The woman looked down at the folder, then calmly lifted her eyes toward him. She didn't appear angry. She didn't appear embarrassed. If anything, she seemed almost thoughtful. That somehow irritated Ryan even more. "Well," he asked, his voice carrying through the marble corridor. "You dropped something." A couple of younger officers chuckled nervously. The woman remained still. Her charcoal gray coat was simple, her travel bag worn from years of use. Nothing about her appearance suggested power or influence. She looked like someone who had spent a long morning in airports and taxis trying to reach a meeting on time. Ryan glanced at the visitor badge clipped near her shoulder. Naomi Brooks. The name meant nothing to him. What he saw instead was someone who didn't belong in the restricted administrative wing of headquarters. At least, that was what he assumed. Assumptions came easily to Ryan. For years they had served him well. Good evaluations. Commendations. A reputation for confidence. He was one of the department's rising stars, and everyone knew it. In 6 weeks, promotion reviews would begin. Most officers believed Ryan already had the position secured. He believed it too. Across the hallway, Naomi finally bent down and picked up the folder. The motion was unhurried, almost graceful. She brushed a small crease from the cover and carried it toward the desk. Ryan expected a complaint. Maybe an argument. Instead, she simply placed it in front of him. "I believe this belongs to your department," she said. Her voice was calm and measured. Ryan blinked. Something about her composure felt strangely out of place. People usually reacted when he challenged them. They defended themselves. They became frustrated. This woman did neither. "Administrative meeting is upstairs," she continued politely. "I was told to report to conference room B." Ryan smirked. "Conference room B?" He let out a short laugh. "Trust me, you're not headed there." Several officers standing nearby suddenly became interested in their phones. One sergeant quietly turned away. The atmosphere shifted, subtle but noticeable. Ryan ignored it. "That room is reserved for senior leadership and city review personnel," he said. "Not visitors." Naomi nodded once. "I understand." "Do you?" Ryan replied. "Because people have a habit of wandering into places they don't belong." The hallway fell silent again. Somewhere beyond the glass entrance doors, a cold December wind rattled against the building. Naomi stood quietly beneath the bright white lights, her expression unreadable. For a brief second, her gaze moved to the nameplate attached above Ryan's pocket. Officer Ryan Whitaker. She seemed to memorize it. Then she looked back at him. No anger. No resentment. Just quiet attention. Down the corridor, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Several people stepped out carrying tablets and folders. One of them suddenly froze. His eyes widened the moment he spotted Naomi standing at the security desk. Ryan didn't notice. He was too busy smiling at what he believed was another routine display of authority. But 30 feet away, Captain Michael Reeves had just seen something that made the color drain from his face. Captain Michael Reeves rarely looked surprised. 28 years in law enforcement had trained him to keep his expression steady through emergencies, political pressure, and impossible decisions. Yet as he stepped out of the elevator and spotted Naomi Brooks standing beside the security desk, his pace faltered. The tablet tucked beneath his arm slipped slightly, and he caught it with both hands before anyone noticed. Naomi saw him immediately. She offered a small, professional smile. Ryan did not. He was still leaning comfortably against the desk, completely unaware of the shift happening around him. Several officers along the hallway had noticed Captain Reeves's reaction. One lieutenant lowered the coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Another quietly stepped aside. The atmosphere became strangely tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Ryan finally glanced toward the elevator. "Captain," he said confidently. "This visitor seems confused about where she is supposed to be." Reeves did not answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi. "Good morning, Dr. Brooks," he said. Naomi extended her hand. "Good morning, Captain. Thank you for arranging transportation from the airport." Ryan blinked. The smile on his face weakened slightly. "Dr. Brooks." The title lingered in the hallway. Reeves shook her hand warmly. "We are grateful you made the trip. I know your flight landed less than 2 hours ago." "Weather delays in Chicago," Naomi replied. "Nothing unusual this time of year." The conversation sounded ordinary, but Ryan felt something uncomfortable settle in his stomach. He looked from Naomi to Reeves and back again. Nobody had mentioned a doctor. Nobody had mentioned an airport pickup. Most importantly, nobody had mentioned that the woman he had been questioning for the past 15 minutes appeared to know the captain personally. Naomi adjusted the strap of her travel bag. The leather was worn along the edges from years of use. It was the same bag she had carried through graduate school, through government hearings, and through countless meetings in cities across the country. She never saw a reason to replace it. Her father used to tell her that character was measured by consistency, not appearances. The memory surfaced briefly as she glanced toward the large windows overlooking the parking lot. Years earlier, she had sat beside him on the front porch of their small Ohio home while he sorted mail after long shifts at the post office. He had taught her that respect was not something demanded. It was something revealed through actions. Especially when nobody thought they were being observed. That lesson stayed with her long after she earned advanced degrees and accepted positions that placed her in rooms filled with executives, judges, and public officials. Back in the hallway, Reeves cleared his throat. "The board members are already arriving upstairs." "Perfect timing," Naomi said. Ryan frowned. "Board members?" Reeves finally turned toward him. The captain's expression remained neutral, but there was a firmness in his voice now. "Conference room B is expecting Dr. Brooks." Ryan straightened. "I was not informed." "That is because security assignments are not included in board scheduling," Reeves replied. The words were polite. The meaning was not. Around them, the hallway seemed quieter than before. Even the radios clipped to uniforms were silent. Naomi did not say anything. She simply watched. Years of public service had taught her that people often revealed far more about themselves during ordinary moments than during formal evaluations. As Reeves gestured toward the elevator, Naomi started forward. Then she paused. Her eyes briefly settled on Ryan's nameplate once again. Just a second. Long enough to remember the name. Long enough for Ryan to notice. And for the first time that morning, Officer Ryan Whitaker found himself wondering exactly why that name suddenly seemed so important. The elevator climbed smoothly through the building, its steel cables humming behind the walls. Naomi stood beside Captain Reeves, watching the floor numbers illuminate one by one above the door. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence felt comfortable, the kind that came from years of professional experience rather than awkwardness. Reeves finally exhaled. "I owe you an apology for the reception downstairs." Naomi offered a faint smile. "No apology necessary, Captain." I travel enough to know that first impressions can be educational. Reeves glanced at her. The answer was polite, but he knew Naomi well enough to understand what she really meant. People often showed their character before they realized anyone was paying attention. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Conference room B occupied nearly half the level. Glass walls overlooked the city skyline, where gray winter clouds hung low above the streets. Staff members moved quickly between tables arranging folders, tablets, and coffee service. The annual review session always carried tension. Careers could change inside that room. Promotions could be accelerated. Leadership opportunities could appear. Sometimes they disappeared just as quickly. Naomi stepped into the conference room and greeted several board members already seated around the polished walnut table. Some had flown in from neighboring states. Others represented city oversight committees, training commissions, and professional standards divisions. Most had known Naomi for years. They respected her for one simple reason. She never cared about rank. She cared about conduct. At the far end of the table sat Linda Carter, the board's senior administrator. She stood immediately when she saw Naomi. "Dr. Brooks, your evaluation packets are ready." Naomi nodded. "Thank you, Linda." A stack of thick folders waited at her assigned seat. Each contained months of performance reports, citizen feedback, leadership reviews, disciplinary records, and promotion recommendations. Hundreds of pages. Thousands of decisions. Naomi placed her travel bag beneath the chair and settled into her seat. Through the glass wall she could see the city stretching for miles beyond the river. Somewhere below, traffic crawled through the streets while ordinary people started their workdays. Most would never know meetings like this existed. Yet the decisions made here affected entire communities. Meanwhile, downstairs, Ryan Whitaker sat behind the security desk pretending to focus on paperwork. He failed miserably. His eyes kept drifting toward the elevator bank. The uneasy feeling from earlier had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown stronger. "You look distracted," said Sergeant David Moreno as he approached the desk carrying a tablet. Ryan shrugged. "Just wondering who that woman was." Moreno paused. "You mean Dr. Brooks?" Ryan immediately looked up. "You know her?" The sergeant gave him a strange look. Most people in leadership know her name. Ryan felt his stomach tighten again. "Why?" Moreno hesitated. "Because she has been involved with police performance oversight for years." Ryan laughed lightly. "Oversight is a broad term." Moreno did not laugh back. "Not as broad as you think." Before Ryan could ask another question, the sergeant's radio crackled and pulled him away. Ryan stared at the security monitors lining the wall. One screen displayed the executive floor hallway outside conference room B. Staff members continued entering and exiting. He spotted Naomi briefly through the glass. She was reviewing documents while several senior officials listened as she spoke. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody questioned her authority. The image lasted only a few seconds before she disappeared from view. Ryan leaned back slowly in his chair. The confidence that usually followed him through every room felt slightly less solid now. Upstairs, Naomi opened the first evaluation folder of the morning. Her eyes moved across the name printed neatly at the top of the page. Then another. Then another. Outside the conference room, snowflakes had begun drifting across the city skyline. Inside, careers were quietly being measured one decision at a time. The morning review session moved steadily forward. One file after another crossed the conference table. Recommendations were discussed. Training records were examined. Leadership assessments were compared against performance reports. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow drifted slowly across the city, softening the sharp outlines of office towers and bridges in the distance. Inside conference room B, every decision carried weight. Naomi Brooks sat quietly near the center of the table, turning pages with deliberate focus. She rarely spoke first. Instead, she listened. Years of experience had taught her that people often revealed the most important information when they believed nobody was challenging them. A deputy commissioner presented a candidate for advancement. Another board member raised concerns about community complaints. Naomi reviewed the supporting documents before speaking. Her questions were calm, precise, and impossible to ignore. By noon, several officials around the table had already begun relying on her judgment. Meanwhile, downstairs, Ryan Whitaker's curiosity had evolved into frustration. Every answer seemed to create more questions. He had attempted to concentrate on routine assignments, but his attention kept drifting toward the executive floor. Around 11:30, he spotted Linda Carter crossing the lobby carrying a stack of binders. Ryan immediately stepped from behind the security desk. "Excuse me, ma'am." Linda stopped politely. "Yes? I was hoping you could clarify something." She adjusted the folders in her arms. "Depends on what it is." Ryan nodded toward the elevators. "Dr. Brooks. What exactly is her role?" Linda studied him for a moment. The question seemed to surprise her. "You do not know?" Ryan forced a casual smile. "I have heard different things." Linda's expression became difficult to read. "Interesting." Ryan waited. "Well?" She shifted the folders again. "Dr. Brooks has worked with oversight and evaluation programs for years." "Evaluation programs?" Ryan repeated. "Correct." Before he could ask another question, someone called Linda's name from across the lobby. She excused herself and continued toward the elevators. Ryan watched her leave. The uneasy pressure in his chest tightened further. Evaluation programs. Oversight. Leadership reviews. The phrases echoed through his thoughts. None of them sounded particularly important on their own. Together, however, they painted a picture he could not fully understand. Shortly after noon, Captain Reeves returned to the lobby carrying a tablet and several documents. Ryan approached him immediately. "Captain, do you have a second?" Reeves glanced up. "Make it quick." Ryan lowered his voice. "Dr. Brooks. What exactly is she doing here?" The captain paused. Snowflakes melted on the shoulders of officers entering through the front doors. A dispatcher answered calls somewhere behind the reception area. For several seconds, Reeves simply looked at him. "She is working," he finally replied. "Working on what?" Ryan asked. Reeves's expression remained neutral. "Things that matter." The answer did not help. If anything, it made Ryan more uncomfortable. Reeves started walking away, then stopped. "Officer Whitaker." Ryan straightened. "Sir?" "A piece of advice." "Yes, sir." Reeves looked directly at him. "Never assume you know who someone is based on where you first meet them." Then he continued across the lobby. Ryan remained frozen beside the security desk. Around him, headquarters continued operating normally. Officers entered and exited. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Yet something felt different now. Like a puzzle slowly assembling itself just beyond his reach. Upstairs, Naomi closed another evaluation file and placed it neatly onto a growing stack. The next folder was already waiting beside her. She glanced at the cover before opening it. Her eyes settled briefly on a familiar name. The same name she had noticed earlier on a polished metal badge downstairs. Ryan Whitaker. Naomi rested her hand lightly on the folder. Around the table, discussions continued uninterrupted. But for the first time all day, she did not immediately turn the page. For several seconds, Naomi did not open the folder. The conference room remained busy around her. Board members reviewed statistics. Department representatives discussed staffing challenges. Coffee cups rested beside tablets glowing with charts and performance metrics. Yet the name printed on the folder seemed heavier than the others. Ryan Whitaker. Naomi finally opened the file. The first pages contained exactly what she expected. Strong arrest records. Positive supervisor comments. Community outreach participation. Leadership recommendations. On the surface, the file belonged to a rising officer with a promising future. Several commendations had been highlighted with yellow tabs. One recommendation even described him as a model candidate for advancement. Naomi continued reading. Slowly. Carefully. She never evaluated people based solely on accomplishments. Character mattered. Conduct mattered. Judgment mattered. The deeper sections of the file contained notes from training supervisors and professional development instructors. Most were positive. A few were not. One comment mentioned unnecessary assumptions during citizen interactions. Another referenced concerns regarding professionalism when dealing with individuals perceived as lower status. The language was cautious. Not severe enough to trigger disciplinary action. Just enough to create a pattern. Naomi turned another page. Across the table, Linda Carter quietly slid additional materials toward her. Supplemental observations, she whispered. Naomi nodded. The supplemental reports included anonymous feedback gathered during leadership assessments. Several remarks praised Ryan's confidence. Others described him as dismissive. A few suggested he sometimes treated people differently depending on how much authority he believed they possessed. Naomi rested her pen on the table. The room's overhead lights reflected softly across the polished wood surface. Outside the windows, snow continued falling over the city. Downstairs, Ryan sat alone during a brief break between assignments. He opened the department portal on his computer and searched for Naomi Brooks. What appeared on the screen immediately erased whatever confidence remained. Public records. Professional certifications. Advisory boards. Oversight commissions. National speaking engagements. Academic appointments. His eyes moved rapidly across the page. The woman he had treated like an inconvenience possessed credentials that stretched back nearly 2 decades. Ryan swallowed. The memory of the morning replayed itself in painful detail. The folder sliding across the floor. His comments. The assumptions. The smirk. Every moment now sounded different inside his head. A notification appeared on his screen. Mandatory personnel briefing. Conference Room B. Attendance required for all promotion candidates at 2 o'clock. Ryan stared at the message. Conference Room B. The same room. The same floor. The same people. His pulse quickened. Upstairs, the board meeting was entering its final phase. Promotion recommendations would soon be reviewed. Captain Reeves stepped to the front of the room and addressed the group. Before we begin candidate evaluations, I want to thank Dr. Brooks for assisting with this year's professional standards review. Several officials nodded. Naomi acknowledged the comment with a polite smile. Nothing more. She never enjoyed attention. Reeves continued. Her assessments have become one of the most trusted components of our evaluation process. Around the room, heads nodded again. Naomi glanced briefly at Ryan's file before closing it. Not because she had finished. Because she had learned enough to ask the right questions. 2 floors below, Ryan stepped into an elevator crowded with other promotion candidates. Nobody noticed how quiet he had become. As the doors closed and the elevator began its ascent, he stared at his reflection in the brushed steel wall. For the first time in years, Officer Ryan Whitaker was no longer worried about earning a promotion. He was worried about something much more difficult to recover once lost, the judgment of someone who had already seen exactly who he was when he thought nobody important was watching. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor with a soft chime. Ryan stepped out alongside a dozen other promotion candidates, but unlike the others, he was no longer thinking about advancement. His attention stayed fixed on the glass walls at the end of the corridor. Snow drifted beyond the windows, covering rooftops and streets in a quiet blanket of white. The city seemed distant from up here, muted beneath the winter sky. As the group entered the waiting area outside Conference Room B, conversations remained low and professional. Some officers reviewed notes. Others checked messages on their phones. Ryan sat alone near the far window. For the first time in years, he wished he could rewind a morning and start it over. Inside the conference room, Naomi stood beside the windows during a short recess. A cup of untouched coffee rested on the table behind her. She watched snowflakes swirl between neighboring buildings, moving in unpredictable patterns before disappearing against the glass. The room was silent except for the faint hum of heating vents and the occasional rustle of paperwork. Moments like this had always been her favorite. Not because they were peaceful, but because they revealed perspective. Years earlier, during her first public oversight appointment, an older mentor had told her something she never forgot. Power does not reveal character. It magnifies it. She thought about those words now. Across countless evaluations, she had met extraordinary officers and disappointing leaders. Some people became kinder when they gained authority. Others became careless. The difference usually appeared in small moments nobody expected to matter. A receptionist. A janitor. A visitor. A stranger asking a question. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. The memory of the morning replayed itself. The hallway. The assumptions. The comments. The folder sliding across the polished floor. None of it had angered her as much as it saddened her. Ryan had talent. His file proved that. Yet talent without humility often became a liability disguised as confidence. A knock sounded gently against the glass door. Captain Reeves entered carrying a tablet. He paused when he noticed Naomi standing by the window. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "Just thinking." Reeves followed her gaze toward the snowfall outside. "About Whitaker?" Naomi smiled faintly. "About people." The captain understood immediately. He had spent enough years in leadership to recognize the difference. Naomi was not focused on punishment. She was focused on truth. Reeves folded his hands behind his back. "He has potential." "I know," Naomi replied. "That is what makes this difficult." Outside the waiting area, Ryan stared at the closed conference room doors. Every passing minute seemed longer than the one before. His reflection hovered faintly in the glass beside him. He barely recognized the man looking back. Not because anything had changed physically. Because certainty had vanished. Around him, officers laughed quietly and discussed future assignments. Ryan remained silent. A few feet away, a television mounted on the wall displayed snowfall forecasts for the evening commute. Somewhere below, headquarters continued operating as it always had. Yet here, on the executive floor, everything felt suspended. Then the conference room doors opened. Board members began returning to their seats. One by one, promotion candidates were instructed to prepare for individual reviews. Ryan felt his heartbeat quicken as he watched Naomi take her place at the center of the table. She opened a folder, adjusted her glasses, and calmly looked toward the waiting area. The folder resting in front of her carried a familiar name. Ryan Whitaker heard his name and felt every sound in the waiting area disappear. One moment he was sitting beneath the soft glow of the executive floor lights. The next, he was standing and walking toward the conference room doors. The carpet muffled his footsteps. The glass walls reflected fragments of movement from inside. As he entered, dozens of eyes briefly lifted toward him before returning to their notes and screens. The room felt larger than he remembered. More formal. More important. Snow continued drifting beyond the windows, turning the city skyline into a watercolor of gray and white. Ryan took the designated seat facing the board. A folder rested on the table directly in front of Naomi Brooks. His folder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched just long enough for Ryan to remember every word he had said downstairs that morning. Naomi looked composed as always. Her expression revealed nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. No sign that she intended to embarrass him. Somehow that made the moment harder. Captain Reeves began with standard introductions. Evaluation procedures. Promotion review criteria. Leadership expectations. Ryan heard the words but struggled to focus on them. His attention remained fixed on Naomi. Finally, Reeves nodded toward her. Dr. Brooks, would you like to proceed? Naomi opened the folder and adjusted a page. Officer Whitaker, she began calmly, your performance record shows strong initiative, excellent case management, and consistent productivity. Ryan nodded slightly. The words sounded encouraging. Then Naomi continued. Several supervisors describe you as ambitious and capable of leadership responsibility. Again, true. Again, encouraging. Around the table, board members reviewed their copies of the report. Naomi turned another page. Her voice never changed. Leadership, however, involves more than performance metrics. It also involves judgment. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. Naomi glanced down briefly before continuing. One of the responsibilities of this board is evaluating how officers treat people when no formal evaluation is taking place. Several members nodded. Ryan understood exactly where this was going. Naomi closed the folder halfway. Tell me, Officer Whitaker. How do you determine who deserves respect? The question landed softly, yet it carried more weight than any accusation could have. Ryan opened his mouth, then stopped. The answer that would have sounded convincing yesterday suddenly felt hollow. The room remained silent. Nobody rushed to help him. Nobody interrupted. Finally he spoke. I would like to believe I treat everyone fairly. Naomi held his gaze. Not aggressively. Simply honestly. Would like to believe? Ryan looked down at the polished table surface. Reflections from the overhead lights shimmered across the wood grain. He exhaled slowly. This morning suggests otherwise. For the first time all day, a different kind of silence settled over the room. Not tension. Recognition. Ryan continued before fear could stop him. I made assumptions. I judged someone based on appearance and circumstance instead of taking time to understand who they were. Naomi listened carefully. The board members did the same. Ryan swallowed. The truth is, I thought I was evaluating someone. I never considered that my own character was being revealed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows in steady waves. Naomi finally closed the folder completely. Then she looked around the table. Several board members exchanged quiet glances. One by one, they seemed to reach the same conclusion. The biggest revelation of the day was no longer who Naomi Brooks was. It was whether Ryan Whitaker had finally begun to understand who he was. The room remained quiet after Ryan finished speaking. No one rushed to fill the silence. No one offered immediate approval or criticism. The board members simply observed. Years of experience had taught them that genuine reflection rarely arrived wrapped in perfect words. It appeared in pauses, in uncomfortable truths, and in moments when pride finally stepped aside. Naomi rested her hands on the closed folder in front of her. The winter light filtering through the windows softened the room, casting pale reflections across the polished table. She studied Ryan for a moment. The confidence that had defined him all morning was gone. In its place stood something far more valuable. Awareness. "Officer Whitaker," she said calmly, "do you know why professional conduct reviews exist?" Ryan answered honestly. "To identify weaknesses." Naomi shook her head slightly. "Partly. But more importantly, they exist to identify whether someone is willing to grow beyond those weaknesses." Several board members nodded. One commissioner leaned back in his chair, listening carefully. Naomi continued. "Every person in this room has made mistakes. Every person in leadership has experienced moments they wish they could revisit." Her voice remained steady. "The difference is not whether mistakes happen. The difference is what happens after they are recognized." Ryan listened without looking away. For the first time since entering the room, he was not trying to defend himself. He was trying to understand. Naomi opened the folder one final time and reviewed the last page. The room was so quiet that the turning paper seemed unusually loud. Outside, snow continued drifting across the city. Far below, traffic lights changed from red to green and back again while ordinary life carried on. Inside the conference room, careers and reputations were being measured with equal care. Captain Reeves folded his hands. "Dr. Brooks, do you have a recommendation?" Several eyes shifted toward her. This was the moment Ryan had feared ever since learning who she was. The moment when authority could easily become revenge. Naomi looked down at the evaluation form. Then she picked up her pen. The scratching sound against paper lasted only a few seconds. When she finished, she placed the pen beside the folder and closed it. "My recommendation," she said, "is that Officer Whitaker continue in consideration for advancement." Ryan blinked. A few board members exchanged surprised looks. Naomi was not finished. "However, I am also recommending mandatory leadership mentoring and professional conduct development." The room remained attentive. "Potential should be rewarded," she continued. "But potential without self-awareness creates risk." Today, Officer Whitaker demonstrated something important. He accepted responsibility without excuses. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly. Naomi's expression softened. "Not with sympathy. With fairness." "Leadership is not proven when everything goes right," she said. "It is proven when someone chooses growth after discovering they were wrong." The tension that had followed Ryan all day slowly began to loosen. Not because consequences had disappeared. They had not. They would remain part of his record. But something unexpected had happened. Naomi had given him an opportunity instead of a punishment. A path forward instead of a wall. As board members finalized notes and signed documents, Ryan realized that the most important decision made that afternoon was not about promotion at all. It was about character. And the woman he had underestimated had just demonstrated more leadership in a few minutes than any rank or title could ever provide. By the time the meeting concluded, the winter sun had already begun sinking behind the skyline. The snowfall had slowed to a gentle drift, and the city below glowed beneath the soft silver light of late afternoon. One by one, board members gathered their folders and tablets. Quiet conversations filled the room as chairs slid back from the table. Captain Reeves exchanged handshakes with several commissioners before leaving to prepare for the evening briefing. Within minutes, only a few people remained. Naomi placed the final signed documents into a leather portfolio and carefully closed the clasp. Another year of evaluations was complete. Another set of decisions had been made. Yet her thoughts were not on paperwork. They were on something far simpler. Character. She stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. Hundreds of headlights had begun appearing along the streets below. Life continued moving forward, as it always did. Behind her, footsteps approached slowly. She already knew who it was before turning around. Ryan stopped several feet away. For a moment neither spoke. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the heating system and the faint tapping of snow against the glass. Ryan looked different than he had that morning. Not weaker. Just quieter. More thoughtful. He took a breath. Dr. Brooks. Naomi turned toward him. Officer Whitaker. He nodded once. I wanted to thank you. Naomi listened without interruption. Ryan glanced briefly toward the empty conference table. You could have made today much harder than it was. Naomi smiled faintly. That was never my goal. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment. I know that now. The honesty in his voice carried none of the confidence that had defined him earlier. Only sincerity. Naomi folded her hands comfortably in front of her. Do you know what impressed me most today? Ryan looked surprised. No, ma'am. She nodded toward the chair where he had sat during the review. You stopped defending yourself. He considered that for several seconds. The answer seemed simple, yet it struck deeper than he expected. Naomi continued. Most people spend their lives protecting an image of themselves. Very few have the courage to examine it honestly. Outside the window, a gust of wind carried snow across the rooftops below. The city lights shimmered against the fading sky. Ryan smiled slightly. I still have a lot to learn. So does everyone, Naomi replied. The two stood quietly for a moment, watching the evening settle over the city. Then Naomi picked up her portfolio. Leadership is not about being the most important person in the room. Ryan nodded. It is about how you treat people when you think they are not important. Naomi's eyes reflected the last traces of daylight beyond the glass. Ryan recognized the sentence immediately. It perfectly described everything that had happened. Not only today. Throughout his entire career. He extended his hand. Naomi accepted it. The gesture was simple. Respectful. Nothing more needed to be said. A few minutes later, Ryan stood alone in the hallway as Naomi entered the elevator and disappeared behind closing doors. The corridor became still. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. In the distance, officers moved through headquarters beginning another shift. Ryan glanced down at the polished metal badge on his uniform. Then he looked toward the elevator one final time. The promotion review would eventually be decided. The reports would be filed. The records would be archived. But long after those details faded, one lesson would remain. The people who change your life are not always the ones who hold power over you. Sometimes they are the ones who show you how to use your own. And as the last light of day settled across the quiet hallway, Ryan Whitaker stood silently beneath its glow, no longer thinking about advancement, only about becoming worthy of it.